So communities planning under the Growth Management Act have a series of tools to consider the environmental implications of the decisions that they're making. From the basic bread and butter planning, things like how are we going to accommodate the growth that we're expecting to see in our community, and how do we provide capital facilities to provide basic infrastructure to those folks. These are decisions that are going to have an impact on the environment, things like the health of the Puget Sound or sprawl. Then you have the authority to use optional tools to consider things more specifically like sustainability or climate or energy. And then you have a series of regulatory roles and responsibilities that you need to wrestle with as you're making these long-term planning decisions. Things like managing your critical areas under the Growth Management Act or managing stormwater under the Clean Water Act. And then you've got SEPA that sort of ties it all together, provides you another set of tools and a mechanism to consider the environmental impacts of the decisions that you're making. In this video, we're going to focus on the regulatory tools and responsibilities that you'll be grappling with when you make these decisions.
So one of the most important parts of your critical areas regulations is the intent statement or purpose statement. At the beginning of the ordinance, this should state that the purpose is to protect the functions and values of critical areas. The reason for this is that the public and the stakeholder groups will be interested to see, and it clarifies that the purpose ultimately is to protect private property and the value of that, as well as your ecosystems and environmental functions and values again in the community. Some cities adopt the critical areas policies in their comprehensive plans. That provides a broad policy direction. They do not have to do that, but they can choose to do so. However, the development regulations are what really provides the land use controls, and that is required under the Growth Management Act to have those development regulations protect the functions and values of critical areas. One of the most important aspects of the Growth Management Act is to include best available science in your consideration of your critical areas regulations. The best available science is not something the cities have to develop themselves or come up with themselves. You don't necessarily have to commission new scientific studies. It's to find the best available science, and many times the resources for that can be found on state agency websites, or if there's more localized science groups that have put together some information, that's another good source. The Department of Commerce has a collection of the state agency science that has been developed, and this website can show you critical areas, scientific information on any type of critical areas, and it's all in one place. Keep in mind that as you're adopting critical areas regulations, as with all regulations that affect private property, you must avoid a complete taking of all reasonable use of the property. This is often done through a reasonable use exception. That's a provision in the ordinance to ensure that that happens, or a variance process that allows for adjustments to the regulations and how they're applied to a particular piece of property. There's a guide to avoiding unconstitutional takings of private property that the Attorney General has produced and is on the Commerce website and available at this location. Critical areas also occur along shorelines, which are governed by the Shoreline Management Act. You have a shoreline master program that you adopt to protect those areas, and under state law, the shoreline master program that you adopt will become the regulator of protecting critical areas functions and values in that shoreline jurisdiction. So once that shoreline master program is updated and approved by ecology, it takes the place of the critical areas ordinance in protecting those critical areas functions and values within that shoreline area. Although cities can allow some impacts to critical areas, even some small loss of portions of critical areas, the purpose of the critical areas regulations is to ensure that there's no overall loss to the critical area system. This is sometimes referred to as no net loss of critical areas functions and values.
The requirement to develop low-impact development regulations is independent from the requirement to update your growth management comprehensive plan, but the two are related. Local comprehensive plans provide the framework for the development regulations, including stormwater regulations, and you may want to think about whether your community wants policies in the comprehensive plan to guide the way you manage stormwater through low-impact development. Early approaches to stormwater management focused on just getting water off-site as quickly as possible through a series of pipes and ditches into the nearest river or lake. And then for the past few decades, we've tried to resolve some of the problems with erosion and pollution by using detention ponds or vaults to capture that water and treat it, and then release it more slowly. But even that hasn't been enough to address the problems of pollution and erosion that come from concentrating all that stormwater runoff. So low impact development, or LID, refers to a collection of approaches to try to treat stormwater in a more natural way. We have several examples of it, even right here at Shoreline City Hall. There's a green roof above the council chambers. We have bioswales to treat water runoff and rain gardens in front of the building. Some of our sidewalks are even made of permeable concrete so that water can flow right through the sidewalk into the ground. So these and other low impact development approaches are designed to capture more of the water on site and help it either get taken up by the vegetation in the trees or soak into the soil so that it doesn't flow off the site and pollute our rivers and lakes. Low impact development will change the way development occurs, and it has applications for every kind of development, from single-family homes to large commercial developments. So it's very important to engage the public and the community early on and throughout the process of developing your local regulations. You'll have to think about how to explain the benefits that low impact development has, both for the community and for the environment, in order to help build support for your program.
One of the major changes that occurred in state law that affects permitting occurred in 1995 with the Regulatory Reform Act. And the legislature has declared that fundamental choices in land use are made at the time of plan development and not at permitting. And that sometimes is a difficult concept for our citizens to understand, that you can't not participate in a planning process and then at the time that a particular proposal or project is made, there are choices that have already been made years in advance, and the time of permitting isn't a debate of whether a project should go ahead or not, but under what circumstances. From time to time there have been efforts to reform the State Environmental Policy Act, and it shouldn't be looked at as lessening the need for environmental review as much as to make the State Environmental Policy Act more efficient, more effective, and more useful as a disclosure tool. If there are issues that come up time and time again in a community, you really need to step back and take a look at how do we address these in policy and ordinance so our citizens understand what the vision of the city is and where we want to go, as well as for the applicant, provide them predictability and rely less and less on the case-by-case basis where the outcome sometimes is very unpredictable. It would be unfortunate to have a system where decisions made on the types of environmental review were left to a political process as opposed to a more technical examination of the true issues that are involved. Most councils are part-time, they're volunteers. We do rely on expertise of our engineering staff, our planning staff, all the other staff members that we have. In terms of what their level of understanding needs to be, they need to have a fundamental understanding of why these standards are in place and what are they intended to achieve, and how do they fit into the schema of the community's planning process. Well, the state of Washington's land use and environmental laws are many, and they provide a lot of opportunities to use those different tools and not rely solely on environmental review, which traditionally is a project-by-project basis. And by doing an integrated environmental review at the time that policies and ordinances are put together, then using those policies and ordinances to develop the regulations to better guide land use, you provide more predictability to the public as well as to project applicants.